All right. We will continue with Solving 9/11 by Christopher Bollyn. Last time I left off page 116. Well, we got a lot to cover. I'll start out with my usual disclaimers. This is not about my Jewish doctor, my Jewish lawyer, my Jewish dentist, my Jewish mechanic, or whatever. This is about a certain group of people who conducted 9/11, and the same people who sunk the USS Liberty, and the same people who started World War II, World War I, and that's what this is all about, is telling the truth about who did what and why. And there's nothing wrong with getting to the bottom and being honest and truthful about whatever it is that happened, no matter how unpopular. Okay, so basically what Christopher Bollyn's done was wrote articles. He started right after 9/11 as different pieces of evidence came forward, and he just would write article after article. And now I went through the book, and I'm going to read what I think are the most significant passages. So here's one on Flight 93, landed in Cleveland. The first, an AP wire story, was copied, pasted, and posted on the websites of Cincinnati's WCPO TV at 11:43 a.m. Eastern Time on September 11, 2001, by Liz Foreman. The AP report said that United Airlines Flight 93 had landed in Cleveland. This is a news report about the flight that supposedly crashed into a reclaimed mine near Shanksville, Pennsylvania at 10:06 a.m. Eastern Time. Foreman told me that she had taken the story directly from the AP wire service. A Boeing 767 out of Boston made an emergency landing Tuesday at Cleveland Hopkins International Airport due to concerns that it may have a bomb aboard, said Mayor Michael R. White. White said the plane had been moved to a secure area of the airport and was evacuated. United identified the plane as Flight 93. The airline did say how many people were aboard the flight. United said it was also deeply concerned about another flight, Flight 175, a Boeing 767, which was bound from Boston to Los Angeles. On behalf of the airline, CEO James Goodwin said, "The thoughts of everyone at United are with the passengers and crew of these flights. Our prayers are also with everyone on the ground who may have been involved. United is working with all the relevant authorities, including the FBI, to obtain further information on those flights," he said. This report of 147 words, which can still be found at the station's archives, has been purged from the historical record. The story's original location on WCPO's website brings up a page with the title, but no story. This is what one finds today. Plane lands in Cleveland, bomb feared aboard. The story has been removed from WCPO.com and was a preliminary AP story and was factually incorrect. That's what it says. A seemingly well-documented AP story quoting senior United Airlines personnel and the mayor of Cleveland about the landing of one of the four planes involved in 9/11 was deleted from the historical record because it was deemed to be factually incorrect. And who decided that? Foreman told me that the story remained on WCPO's website until a year and a half ago, when it was removed after a radio talk show brought attention to it. The government did not call me up, Foreman said. It did not go on the air. Why was WCPO the only website that picked up the AP story? I asked Connie Mabin, AP's Cleveland bureau chief. If the story had originated at her office, it preceded me, Mabin said. I've only been here a couple of years. A written request about the story sent to AP's New York headquarters had not been answered by press time. Explosives in the Towers, a second story that was kept out of the public archives, was written on September 11, 2001 by veteran journalist Oliver Udelbrock of the Albuquerque Journal. The story appeared on the second page of the journal's 9/11 Extra edition. The story was based on a telephone conversation with Van Romero, an explosive expert and former director of Energetic Materials Research and Testing Center, EMRTC, the bomb school at New Mexico Tech. MRTC studies explosions, its website says. About 100 staff workers and 20 students study explosive materials and the effects of explosions on structures of all kinds. At its core, Udelbrock later wrote, Tech is as much a federal work site as a university. Not only does much of the research money come from the Department of Defense, 1 in 10 Tech graduates take a job at one of the state's nuclear labs, Sandia or Los Alamos National Laboratories. The Defense Department pays for 37% of Tech's research funding, the Department of Energy 20%, the National Science Foundation 14%, and the remainder is from other sources. Van Romero spoke with Udelbrock shortly after the Twin Towers collapse. Udelbrock wrote on 9/11, televised images of the attack on the World Trade Center suggest that explosive devices caused the collapse of both towers, a New Mexico Tech explosion expert said Tuesday. The collapse of the buildings appears too methodical to be chance result of airplanes colliding with structures, said Van Romero, Vice President for Research at New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology. My opinion is based on the videotapes that after the airplanes hit the World Trade Center, there were some explosive devices inside the buildings that caused the towers to collapse, Romero said. The article was published online under the title Explosives Planted in Towers, New Mexico Tech's expert says. An archivist at the paper told me that the print article was titled Use of Explosives Believed and ran on page A2 in an extra edition on September 11, 2001. The extra edition of the paper was archived in the usual manner according to Judy Pence, librarian for the journal. The Udelbrock story, however, is not found in any of the public archives of news articles from September 11, 2001. I asked Newsbank Incorporated of Chester, Vermont, why the article does not appear in their databanks of news articles. We checked with the Albuquerque Journal. Lisa Vesey of Newsbank wrote, and learned the paper did not submit the article to the archive. We do not have control over the content in the online archive. The paper sends us the content to be archived, and we have to archive exactly what they send. We can't add or remove any articles. Kent Waltz, editor of the Albuquerque Journal, was unaware of the Udelbrock article, is unaware that the Udelbrock article is not in the national newspaper databanks. The article is in the journal's archive, he said, which is accessible to subscribers. Waltz told me that he had not withheld the story. The contents of the extra edition were sent to the archives as usual, Waltz said. I don't know of any instructions to the contrary. Immediately after the collapses, Romero said, the collapse of the structures resemble those of controlled implosions used to demolish old structures. It would be difficult for something from the plane to trigger an event like that, Romero said in a phone interview from Washington, D.C. Romero said he and another tech administrator were on a Washington area subway when an airplane struck the Pentagon. He said he and Denny Peterson, Vice President for Administration and Finance, were en route to an office building near the Pentagon to discuss defense-funded research programs at the Tech. The article included, the detonation of bombs within the towers is consistent with a common terrorist strategy, Romero said. One of the things terrorist events are noted for is a diversionary attack and secondary device, Romero said. Attackers detonate an initial diversionary explosion that attracts emergency personnel to the scene, then detonate a second explosive. Romero said that if his scenario is correct, the diversion attack would have been the collision of the planes into the towers. Fire, not explosives. A search of Newsbank for articles from Albuquerque Journal about events of 9/11 does not find Edelbrock's article, but does show one written later by John Fleck, dated September 21st, 2001, titled "Fire Not Extra Explosives, Doomed Buildings," expert says. In this article, Romero recants, without explanation, his earlier opinion. A New Mexico explosive expert said he now believes there were no explosives in the World Trade Center towers, contrary to comments he made the day of September 11th terrorist attack. Certainly fire is what caused the building to fall, said Van Romero, a vice president at New Mexico's Institute of Mining and Technology. The day of the attack, Romero told the Journal, the towers collapse, as seen in news video tapes, looked as though they had been triggered by carefully placed explosives. I wrote to Romero asking why he changed his opinion. He had not responded by press time. After 9/11, Romero received 2 prestigious presidential appointments, including an appointment to serve on the President's Advisory Commission on Education Excellence for Hispanic Americans. The commission was created by President George Bush on October 12, 2001. In January 2002, it was reported that Romero was appointed national chairman of the National Domestic Preparedness Consortium. Romero, who works as a lobbyist for NMT, New Mexico Tech, was credited for procuring some $56 million for the school in 2003. Romero reportedly was influential in making his university first in the nation among institutions of higher education for receiving federal funds. Okay. Is MITRE the Trojan horse of 9/11? MITRE. This is the title. This was written April 1st, 2005. Did a central controller with super user privileges of the command and control system of the Department of Defense, NORAD, the Air Force, and the FAA control the aerial attacks of 9/11? There's only one agency that has that capability, a little-known private company known as MITRE Corp. In a recent article, The Perfect Terrorist Plan to Level the Twin Towers, created in 1976 by George Zysmansky, it was reported that the U.S. Army devised a plan in 1976 to bring down the towers using commercial airliners and box cutters as weapons. At the time, George H.W. Bush was head of the CIA, and Martin R. Hoffman was Secretary of the Army. Hoffman told me that he did not recall being involved in this planning, reportedly done by the U.S. Army. The MITRE Corporation is a major defense contracting organization headed by the former Director of Central Intelligence, Dr. James Rodney Schlesinger. Schlesinger, who was reportedly made DCI, at the Director of Central Intelligence, at the request of Henry Kissinger in 1973, later served as Secretary of Defense. Schlesinger, a former Director of Strategic Studies at the Rand Corporation, was described in a 1973 biography as a devout Lutheran. Although he was born in New York, 1929, to immigrant Jewish parents from Austria and Russia, Schlesinger earned 3 degrees from Harvard University. Schlesinger's father, an accountant, founded the accounting firm Schlesinger and Haas, and was a trustee and chairman of the budget of the Stephen Weiss Free Synagogue. His father was also a member of New York State Grand Lodge of Masons. The MITRE Corp, of which Schlesinger is chairman of the board of trustees, is connected to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT's Lincoln Laboratory, and Metric Tech, Systems of Falls Church, Virginia. Schlesinger is a senior advisor for the Lehman Brothers investment firm and a member of Defense Policy Board of Advisory Council for the Department of Homeland Security. The MITRE Corp has provided computer and information technology to the FAA and to the U.S. Air Force since the late 1950s. MITRE is a federally funded research and development center for the Department of Defense, the FAA, and the Internal Revenue Service. The chairman of the Board of Trustees, Metretech Systems, a spinoff of MITRE Corp, is Martin R. Hoffman, who served as Secretary of the Army when the Perfect Terrorist Plan was reportedly prepared in 1976. Jennifer Sherman, MITRE's public relations manager for corporate identity in Bedford, said the MITRE is a trusted mentor for the FAA and is a unique provider of objective and independent information for the U.S. Civil Aviation Authority. MITRE's Bedford headquarters are located near Boston Logan Airport, where the two planes that struck the World Trade Center supposedly originated. Bedford lies directly under the flight path of westbound flights leaving Logan. MITRE developed the technology to aid controllers in solving problems while keeping aircraft close to the route, altitude, and speed preferences. Sherman was unable to say why MITRE technology apparently failed on 9/11. Indira Singh, an IT consultant who previously worked on a defense advanced research project and who was employed by J.P. Morgan on 9/11 in risk management, pointed to MITRE's role at FAA during 9/11 Citizens Commission hearings in New York last September. P-Tech was with MITRE Corporation in the basement of FAA for 2 years prior to 9/11, Singh said. Their specific job is to look at interoperability issues the FAA had with NORAD and the Air Force in the case of an emergency. If anyone was in a position to know that the FAA, that there was a window of opportunity or to insert software or to change anything, it would have been P-Tech along with MITRE. A representative of P-Tech could not be reached. P-Tech appears to have been a Mossad front company created to provide insecure software to the U.S. military and intelligence agency. P-Tech was meant to appear Muslim-owned and had Arab owners and financiers, but Mossad controllers. The Israeli Connection, 9/11, April 8, 2005. U.S. investigators and the controlled media have ignored a preponderance of evidence pointing to Israel's intelligence agency, Mossad, being involved in the terror attacks of 9/11. From the very morning aircraft smashed into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, news reports have indicated Israeli intelligence involvement in the events of 9/11 and the planting of false flags to blame Arab terrorists and mold public opinion to support the pre-planned war on terror. Shortly after the destruction of the Twin Towers, radio news reports described 5 Middle Eastern men being arrested in New Jersey after having been seen videotaping and celebrating the explosive collapse of World Trade Center. These men from a phony moving company in Weehawken, New Jersey, turned out to be agents of Israel's military intelligence, Mossad. Furthermore, their moving van tested positive for explosives. Dominic Sutter, the Israeli owner of Urban Moving System, a phony moving company, fled in haste or was allowed to escape to Israel before FBI agents could interrogate him. The captured Israeli agents were returned to Israel on minor visa violations. The Assistant Attorney General in charge of the criminal investigation of 9/11 at the time was Michael Chertoff, the current head of the Department of Homeland Security. Chertoff, the son of the first hostess of Israel's national air carrier, El Al, is an Israeli national. One of the captured Israeli agents later told Israeli television viewers that the men had been sent to document the event which took the lives of some 3,000 Americans, despite the fact that the Israelis arrested in New Jersey evidently had prior knowledge or were involved in the planning of 9/11. The U.S. mainstream media has never even broached the question of Israeli complicity in the attacks. Israeli forewarned. On September 12, 2001, the Internet edition of Jerusalem Post reported the Israeli foreign minister had collected the names of 4,000 Israelis believed to have been in the area of the World Trade Center and the Pentagon at the time of the attack. Yet only one Israeli was killed at World Trade Center and 2 were reportedly killed on the hijacked aircraft. Although a total of 3 Israeli lives were reportedly lost in 9/11, speechwriters for President George W. Bush grossly inflated the number of Israeli dead to 130 in the president's address to a joint session of Congress on September 20, 2001. The fact that only 1 died at the World Trade Center while 4,000 Israelis were thought to have been at the scene of the attacks in 9/11 naturally led to a widespread rumor blamed on Arabic sources that Israelis had been forewarned to stay away that day. Whether the story was the origin of a rumor, Brett Stevens, the Jerusalem Post editor-in-chief, wrote in 2003, I cannot say. What I can say is that there was no mistake in our reporting. Odigo instant messages. Evidence that Israelis had been forewarned several hours before the attack surfaced at an Israeli instant messaging service known as Odigo. This story, clear evidence of Israeli prior knowledge, was reported only briefly in the U.S. media and quickly forgotten. At least 2 Israeli-based employees of Odigo received warnings of an imminent attack in New York City more than 2 hours before the first plane hit the World Trade Center. Odigo had its headquarters 2 blocks from World Trade Center. The Odigo employees, however, did not pass the warning on to the authorities in New York City, a move that could have saved thousands of lives. Odigo has a feature called People Finder that allows users to seek out and contact others based on certain demographics, such as Israeli nationality. 2 weeks after 9/11, Alex Diamandis, Odigo's vice president, reportedly said it was possible that the attack warning was broadcast to other Odigo members, but the company has not received reports of other recipients of the message. The internet address of the sender was given to the FBI, and 2 months later it was reported that the FBI was still investigating the matter. There have been no media reports since. Odigo, like many Israeli software companies, is based and has research and development center in Herzliya, Israeli, the small town north of Tel Aviv, which happens to be where Mossad's headquarters are located. Shortly after 9/11, Odigo was taken over by Converse Technology, another Israeli company. Within a year, 5 executives from Converse reported to have profited by more than $267 million from inside trading. Okay. All right. Up to page 129 now. Morgan Reynolds on World Trade Center demolition, June 16, 2005. Ridiculed and abused by controlled press, independent 9/11 researcher has found a powerful ally in Morgan Reynolds, a former official in the Bush administration. Since Reynolds, professor emeritus at Texas A&M University, a former chief economist for the U.S. Department of Labor, published his article entitled, Why Did the Trade Center Skyscrapers Collapse? On June 9th, the evidence that the Twin Towers and World Trade Center 7 were demolished by explosives can no longer be ignored by the mainstream media. John Daly of United Press International broached the controversial subject on June 13th when he reported that Reynolds said the official story about the collapse of the World Trade Center is bogus and that it is more likely that a controlled demolition destroyed the Twin Towers and WTC 7. Daly's article, published on the Washington Times website, did not appear in the newspaper. It is hard to exaggerate the importance of a scientific debate over the cause of the collapse of the Twin Towers and Building 7, Reynolds said. If the official wisdom on the collapses is wrong, as I believe it is, then the policy based on such erroneous engineering analysis is not likely to be the correct either. As former director of Criminal Justice Center at National Center for Policy Analysis, Reynolds' comments carries substantial weight. Credential matters, he told me. While the public expects the academics and engineers will examine the evidence of 9/11 and speak out, very few are willing to criticize the government's version. One of the most appalling things about the fascist state, Reynolds said, is that the physical scientists and engineers have less freedom to pursue the truth than the social scientists and those in the humanities. They are less free, he said, because physical scientists, engineers, and academics are usually in some way dependent on the government or military. They practice self-censorship, he said. So shortly after 9/11, I reported on evidence of explosives at WTC. Having reported on the flaws in the official version and the evidence that contradicts that version, I was criticized most notably by the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith, ADL, and others tied to Israel. The ADL said in a report from November 29, 2001, this Washington, D.C.-based conspiratorial and anti-Semitic weekly newspaper, the successor to the notorious Spotlight, has repeatedly turned to the subject of 9/11 attacks as grist's mills. Its October 29th issue includes an article by Christopher Bollyn titled "Some Survivors Say Bombs Exploded Inside World Trade Center," in which Bollyn suggests that the mainstream media is ignoring eyewitness accounts of bombs that exploded inside the World Trade Center before the collapse of the Twin Towers. Now, let me just interject here. You got to find it very suspicious that the ADL would characterize 9/11 truth research as anti-Semitic. I mean, that's not only are they saying don't pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, but they're specifically saying pay no attention to the Jewish man behind the curtain. So why shouldn't that raise suspicions? So anyway, today, nearly 4 years after 9/11, there can be no doubt that the mainstream media and the official versions have censored eyewitness accounts of explosions before the collapses at World Trade Center. Numerous journalists, firefighters, and eyewitnesses at the scene reported hearing and feeling a series of explosions before the towers collapsed, but their reports were suppressed and never repeated in the controlled press. William Rodriguez, a janitor at the World Trade Center, even testified to the 9/11 Commission that he had felt an explosion in the lower basement levels of the North Tower a second before the plane struck the building. But none of his testimony appeared in the final report. They violated all the norms of how you should proceed on a criminal investigation, Reynolds said about Michael Chertoff in the FBI investigations of 9/11. We've had zero convictions about the destruction of the steel from World Trade Center, he wrote. The criminal code requires that crime scene evidence be saved for forensic analysis, but FEMA had it destroyed before anyone could seriously investigate it. Number one, I am a citizen, he said, and a thinker. But above all, Reynolds is a highly credentialed former official from the Bush administration who is willing to challenge the seriously flawed official version. Progressive pancaking cannot happen at free fall speed, Reynolds wrote. Free fall would require pulling or removing obstacles below before they could impede or slow the acceleration of falling objects from above. Sequence explosions, on the other hand, explain why the lower floors did not interfere with the progress of the falling objects above. The pancake theory fails this test. If demolition destroyed 3 steel skyscrapers at World Trade Center on 9/11, then the case for an inside job, government attack on America could be compelling, Reynolds says. Meanwhile, the job of scientists, engineers, and impartial researchers everywhere is to get the scientific and engineering analysis of 9/11 right. Though heaven should fall, Reynolds concluded, unfortunately, getting it right in today's security state demands daring because explosives and structural experts have been intimidated in their analysis of the collapse of 9/11. The collapses of 9/11. The censored eyewitnesses' testimony of William Rodriguez, June 16, 2005. Calling for an international investigation, 9/11 terror attacks, Jimmy Walter's European Truth Tour is presenting European audiences with evidence from researchers and compelling testimony from a survivor that shows the official version of events to be false. London, England. After Amsterdam, Berlin, and Paris, the 9/11 European Truth Tour, sponsored by Jimmy Walter, has traveled to London and Madrid despite a media blackout from the controlled press. In the first 3 cities of the tour, hundreds of citizens attended each event. The tour presented back-to-back shows in Paris, May 24th and 25th. Thierry Meyssan, the French author of 2 books on 9/11 attacks, hosted the Paris event and will participate in London and Madrid shows. After Madrid, the tour will visit Vienna, Manchester, and Rome. The tour's most compelling testimony comes from William Rodriguez, a 44-year-old former porter who worked in the World Trade Towers and the World Trade Center for 19 years before 9/11. Most importantly, his testimony contradicts the official version and provides supporting evidence that the towers were destroyed by explosives. The testimony of Rodriguez, who had one of the 5 master keys for the towers, was taken during several hours of closed session in May 2004, but did not appear in the official 9/11 Commission report. The 5 investigators who questioned Rodriguez became very angry, he said, not at me, but what I was saying. I interviewed Rodriguez, who single-handedly cleaned the 3 stairwells of the North Tower for 10 years at the Louvre Museum in Paris on May 25th. That's where he's questioning him. On September 11, 2001, Rodriguez, who worked for the American Building Maintenance, was 30 minutes late for work, arriving at 8:30 a.m. After leaving his backpack in the closet on the 33rd floor, he went to his company office in the tower's basement. At 8:45, he was talking with the supervisor in the first basement level, B1, when he heard and felt a tremendous explosion. Rodriguez said he felt the first explosion come from a lower basement level. The tower had 6 basement levels. The building shook, the ceiling fell, and some of the sprinklers began spraying. Oh my God, what happened? Rodriguez, who survived the first bombing of World Trade Center in 93, said he recalled saying to his boss, "I think it was the electrical generators." No sooner had he spoken these words than the second explosion shook the building, this time coming from the upper part of the tower. The second shot, Rodriguez said, shook the building and cracked the walls. The building moved, he said. At this point, Felipe David, a Honduran who worked for Aramark and maintained the tower's vending machines, appeared before Rodriguez with his arms outstretched. It looked like clothing was hanging from his fingers, Rodriguez said, but it was the skin from his arms. Explosion, explosion, David said. The elevator, Rodriguez then felt a third explosion coming from above. The ground was shaking, he said. I thought it was an earthquake. We've got to get out of here, Rodriguez told the others as he assisted David and 14 others out the building through the loading dock on Vesey Street across from World Trade Center 7. David also had facial injuries that looked to Rodriguez as if he had been burned and cauterized. It did not make sense, Rodriguez said, about the official version that says these explosions in the basement occurred from jet fuel falling down from the elevator shafts. The fact that he felt the explosion in the basement first indicates that it was not caused by falling jet fuel. Rodriguez noticed that the elevator doors in the lobby and the basement levels appeared to have been blown open from below. After bringing David to an ambulance, Rodriguez looked up and saw smoke coming from the top of the tower. Unable to see the tower's communication mast, Rodriguez became concerned for the safety of his friends who worked at the Windows of the World restaurant at the top of the tower. We've got to go back, Rodriguez said. Stay here, his supervisor said. Don't go in there. Taking a radio from a security guard, Rodriguez went back into the building via the loading ramp. Thinking that a bomb had been exploded in the building, Rodriguez checked the trucks he passed. They were all open, and he continued on into the South Tower to check the Operation Control Center. Not finding anybody in the control center, he returned with another maintenance worker to the North Tower. At basement 1 level, he heard the shouts of people coming from a freight elevator. After forcing the elevator door open with a pipe, he saw 2 people trapped in rising water in the elevator car stuck between B2 and B3 levels. The rising water, he said, came from the sprinklers or broken pipes. Using a ladder, Rodriguez climbed down to the top of the car and pulled the 2 workers to safety. After taking them to an ambulance, Rodriguez returned to the tower and began up the stairs with David Lim, a Port Authority police officer, and firefighters. At the lobby level, he noticed that all the glass windows were broken on the tower's west side and the marble had been knocked off the walls. With his master key, he opened the door to each level as they ascended and called out to the people on the floor. Some had lights, some did not, he said. At the 27th level, he came across Ed Baye, a quadriplegic who was being evacuated. He continued up the stairs. His supervisor called him on the radio. "What are you doing there?" they asked. "Abandon the building now." "I can't," Rodriguez replied. "I have the key to the stairwell. I'm helping the fire department." "I heard many, many explosions," Rodriguez said. "We lost 65, he heard on the radio, understanding that the 60th floor had collapsed down to the 44th floor sky lobby. Rodriguez and others decided to descend and get out of the building. At the 27th floor, they took B.A. in a gurney and carried him down the stairs. At the lobby level, firefighters and friends tended B.A. Rodriguez went out the west side entrance to check for an ambulance. As he came out of the building, he heard the police say, "Don't look back, don't look back," which caused Rodriguez to look back. What he saw was the remains of many people who had jumped from the towers and the body of a woman who he had rescued from the 34th floor. Falling glass had nearly cut her body in half, he said. Hearing the sound of the tower begin to fall, Rodriguez dove under a fire truck and was in front of the tower. Under the truck, with two firefighters, Rodriguez said he prayed to God for his body to remain intact so that his mother could recognize him. The tower collapsed around him, and hot dust burned his skin. The truck, however, was not crushed, and within a few hours, Rodriguez was pulled out from under the truck. "I got out the right moment," he said. "I was the last one out." Since 9/11, Rodriguez has chaired the Hispanic Victims Group and the Victim Support Group, while his story has been published in Colombia in Spanish-language book entitled Mother's Day Horror. It was not available in English. Okay. Who's behind the London bombings? Before the smoke had even cleared, USA Today, a paper with ties to the CIA, blamed Islamic terrorists for bombings. The first sentence of the paper's July 8 front-page story pointed the finger at Islamist militants before any subjects had even been identified. The 4 explosions reported appeared to be the work of Islamic terrorists affiliated with those responsible for September 11 attacks, officials said. Jack Straw, the British Foreign Secretary, and Prime Minister Tony Blair were among the first to blame Islamic terrorists. "It has the hallmarks of Al-Qaeda-related attack," Straw said. Since the bombing of the British Broadcasting Corporation and other mass media outlets have accepted as fact the unproven allegations. Working from that assumption, they debate how British-born Muslims could commit such senseless atrocities against fellow Britons. The question of who is actually responsible for the crime, however, is seldom raised. The young suspects from the city of Leeds do not fit the terrorist profile for such a random and senseless terror bombing. Well-assimilated Muslims and fathers of young children with one wife expecting a child, these young men seem to have been used as unwitting mules in a sinister false flag operation. Reports in the British press suggest the young men were duped into a scheme in which they thought they were carrying innocent packages of perfume while hidden hand-inserted lethal bombs in their backpacks. The London bombers may have been duped into killing themselves, Jeff Edwards on the Daily Mirror wrote. The evidence is compelling. The terrorists brought return rail tickets and pay and display car park tickets before boarding a train at Luton for London. None of the men was heard to cry Allah Akbar, usually screamed by suicide bombers as they detonate their bombs. The devices were in large rucksacks which could be easily dumped instead of being strapped to their bodies. They carried wallets containing their driver's licenses, bank cards, and other personal items. Suicide bombers normally strip themselves of identifying materials, Edward noted. Perfume bombers. One of the suicide bombers, Jermaine Lindsay, 19, spent nearly $2,000 on expensive perfumes from different stores in the days prior to the bombings, according to some terror experts. The terrorists thought the alcohol-based perfumes would act like napalm and the metal containers like shrapnel. British news reports about the suicide bombers sounds like comedy scripts, 9/11 writer Eric Hofschmidt said. We are now expected to consider that these terrorists placed expensive containers of perfumes around the bombs. However, the ridiculous aspects of the suicide bombers could indicate they were useful idiots. Perhaps these 4 young men were fooled into thinking that they were purchasing perfume for quality control, or that they were checking the performance of sales clerks, Hufschmid said. After receiving payments for purchasing the perfumes, they would have been more trusting of their employers, so they would be happy to deliver. Do not open packages on the morning of July 7th. They would never suspect that somebody with a cell phone would detonate bombs in their backpacks while they were on the trains. The Israeli finance minister Benjamin Netanyahu was staying at a hotel above the bombings that occurred on the Piccadilly line near Russell Square. Netanyahu, an extreme right-wing Israeli politician with the Likud party, is a chief architect of the war on terror. Since the 1980s, Netanyahu has written books urging the Western democracies to wage war against the Arab Muslim nations. The U.S.-led invasions and occupations of Iraq is exactly that kind of military action Netanyahu has called for since 1985. The Israeli embassy in London was notified in advance, resulting in Finance Minister Benjamin Netanyahu remaining in his hotel room. The Israeli press reported the source of the warning to British police was not revealed. Netanyahu was in London to speak at a conference to promote investment in Israel. Like 9/11 and other false flag acts of terror, the London bombings occurred during a large-scale terrorist exercise that took place at the same time and locations as the actual explosions. Peter Power, former high-ranking employee of Scotland Yard and a member of its anti-terrorist branch, told BBC 5 and ITV News that his company, Visor Consulting, had carried out crisis exercises with an unnamed private company. The exercise envisioned almost precisely the bombings that actually occurred, Power said. Power describes a simulation of simultaneous attacks on an underground and mainline station. The bombs going off precisely at the railway station at which the actual bombings occurred. There were a few seconds when the audience didn't realize whether it was real or not, he said. On ITV, Power suggested that the unnamed partner in the terror exercise was concerned about Jewish buildings and banks being targeted. 9/11's window, quest for truth. The government's, August 2005, the government's legal strategy has been to encourage the relatives to accept compensation from taxpayer-funded Victims' Compensation Fund. Families who accept compensation from the government-administered fund forfeit their right to sue the airlines or any other parties for damages. The 9/11 Victim Compensation Fund is administered by Special Master Kenneth Feinberg. Feinberg has also served as Special Master in other high-profile settlements involving Agent Orange, asbestos, and breast implants. He was also an arbitrator who determined the allocation of illegal fees in the Holocaust slave labor litigation. I don't want taxpayers' money, Mariana said. That she's one of the plaintiffs. I want the truth, justice, and accountability. The sense of closure and justice cannot be compensated with money. Okay. Is Ariel Sharon the mastermind on 9/11? January 2006. All these analyses have only one thing in common, Avnery said. They have nothing to do with the real Ariel Sharon. They are based on ignorance, illusions, and self-deception. He has not changed at all. Avnery, who has personal knowledge of Sharon, said he stayed true to his fundamental approach, only adapting his slogans to changing times and circumstances. His master plan remained as it was at the beginning. Underlying his worldview is simplistic, 19th century style nationalism, which says our people stands above all others. Other people are inferior. The rights of our nation are sacred. Other nations have no rights at all. The rules of morality apply only to relations within the nation, not to relations between nations, Avnery wrote. On this moral basis, the aim emerged to establish a Jewish state as large as possible, free of non-Jews, that could lead to the conclusion that the ethnic cleansing begun by Ben-Gurion in 1948, when half the Palestinians were deprived of their homes and land, must be completed. Abney wrote, Sharon's career began shortly after when he was appointed to lead the undercover commando unit 101, whose murderous actions beyond the borders were designed mainly to prevent refugees from infiltrating back into their villages. Sharon the terrorist. A salient fact of Israeli history, generally ignored by Zionist-controlled press, is that several Israeli prime ministers were terrorists who bombed and murdered their way to the top. Menachem Begin, Yitzhak Samir, Ariel Sharon were all well-known terrorists who later became Israeli prime ministers. Sharon, for example, commanded a terrorist massacre in Kibbah, a West Bank village which was Jordanian in 1953. This particular raid had a profound impact on U.S.-Israeli relations. In the middle of the night, on October 14, 1953, Sharon led his Unit 101 across the border and into a defenseless sleeping village. Using automatic weapons and grenades, Sharon and his men forced fleeing residents back into their homes and used dynamite to blow up 41 homes, a school, with the people inside. 69 civilians were slaughtered. The massacre and demolition lasted several hours. Days later, the U.S. State Department issued a statement calling the Kibbah massacre shocking and confirming that aid to Israel had been suspended. This was the first and only time that an American president cut off aid to Israel. Were the hordes of Israeli intelligence agents, including some... this is Sharon in 9/11. Were the hordes of Israeli intelligence agents, including some 200 fake movers and art students, nabbed by the police in the United States in connection with the terror attacks of 9/11, simply part of a rogue operation which Sharon, the master of Israeli state-sponsored terrorism, was completely unaware of? Did the Mossad establish phony moving companies in the New York City area and have dozens of agents with prior knowledge, like those arrested in New Jersey on 9/11, running around the country in moving vans without the Prime Minister's knowing? Were the Odigo instant message warnings, which clearly showed prior knowledge of the attacks and which were received by Israeli employees of the Mossad-operated company hours before the first plane hit, being sent between agents of a rogue terror network of which Sharon had no control or knowledge? Although the evidence clearly points to Israeli state involvement, the controlled press in the United States has censored any discussion of Mossad's involvement in the terror attacks of 9/11. Therefore, the obvious question concerning Sharon is never asked. Is he the terrorist mastermind in 9/11? While the controlled media seeks to whitewash Sharon's career as a master of terrorism, the evidence indicates that he was involved in 9/11 and the Zionist-controlled media is complicit in a conspiracy to cover up the evidence. This is to say that Sharon is one of the chief architects of 9/11 terror attacks. Zionist agents in key positions in the U.S. government, like Michael Chertoff at the Department of Justice, the son of one of Israel's first Mossad agents, facilitated 9/11 cover-up by releasing scores of arrested Israeli intelligence agents and assigning blame to Muslims in order to start the war on terror. The ties between Netanyahu and Silverstein, 2006. Although there is a preponderance of evidence to support the theses that Israeli intelligence was involved in the terror attacks of 9/11, I'm the only journalist who had seriously pursued this line of inquiry since 2001. During the 9/11 Truth Tour in Europe with Jimmy Walter, I was prevented from speaking in Vienna only because of the content of my speech. I was the only speaker who discussed the evidence that Israeli was involved in the planning and execution of 9/11. Central to my thesis is the fact that U.S.-based Zionist agents such as Michael Chertoff, Rupert Murdoch, the leaseholders of Larry Silverstein and Frank Lowy, the chairman of the Port Authorities, Louis M. Eisenberg, the head of the fake moving company, Dominic Sutter, and many others were part of a huge and complex plot designed by architect-level planners within the Israeli political intelligence elite. Near the top of this pile is a man named Benjamin Netanyahu, who happens to be running for prime minister in Israel next month. Netanyahu wrote a book in 1986 about his main thesis, which is the war on terror. Netanyahu is the Israeli politician who coined the phrase and called on the Western democracies to join the war on terror against Israel's enemies. Netanyahu is one of the architects of 9/11. It was instrumental in pulling the strings of the actors involved in this complex plot. An article in the Israeli newspaper Excerpts from November 2001 shows just how close Netanyahu is with Larry Silverstein, who controlled the 3 buildings that were demolished on 9/11. Haaretz article by Sarah Libovich Dar reveals the close ties with Netanyahu that Silverstein has. The two have been on friendly terms since Netanyahu's stint as an Israeli ambassador to the United Nations. For years they kept a close touch. Every Sunday afternoon, New York time, Netanyahu would call Silverstein. It made no difference what the subject was or where Netanyahu was. He would always call Silverstein, told an Israeli acquaintance. The Israeli newspaper reported the article titled Up in Smoke, which is an appropriate title because that is exactly where the evidence pointing to Israeli involvement in 9/11 has gone, thanks to Zionist-controlled press in the United States. Up in Smoke. Judicial hijacking of a 9/11 victims lawsuit. I want justice, Marani, that's her name. Marani said, I want accountability. Who is responsible? I want the truth today. Marani, like the other 9/11 plaintiffs, is under a legal gag order which prevents her from speaking about her ongoing lawsuit. Likewise, thousands of employees of federal agencies such as the Federal Aviation Administration have received secret gag orders in the mail preventing them from speaking about what they know about 9/11 events. In the case of at least one of these security defendants, Huntley USA, there would seem to be a serious conflict of interest for the judge because the airline security company, who is responsible for the shocking security lapses at both Boston and Newark airports in 9/11, is wholly owned subsidiary of an Israeli company, ICTS, headed by Israelis with clear ties to Israel's intelligence agency, the Mossad. Judge Hellerstein, on the other hand, has deep and long-standing Zionist connection and close family ties to the State of Israel. A Zionist is a supporter of the Jewish State of Israel. Judge Hellerstein's wife, for example, is a former senior vice president and current treasurer of a New York-based Zionist organization called AMIT. AMIT promotes Jewish immigration to Israel and stands for Americas for Israel and Torah. AMIT's motto is Building Israel, one child at a time. Judge Hellerstein, 73, is also a longtime member of the Jewish Center of New York and a former president of the Board of Jewish Education of Greater New York. This raises obvious questions about why the 9/11 terror case, in which an Israeli security company is a key defendant, in which individuals from Israeli military intelligence are suspected of being involved, was Hellerstein chosen to preside over all 9/11 victims' lawsuit. Who chose him? Some victims' families brought lawsuits against Huntley, claiming the Israeli-owned airport security firm had been grossly negligent on 9/11. While these relatives have a right to discovery and to know what Huntley did or did not do to protect their loved ones on 9/11, Huntley was granted complete congressional protection in 2002 and will not be called to account for his actions on 9/11 in any U.S. court. On July 26, 2002, the U.S. House of Representatives passed the Homeland Security Bill and slipped in a last-minute provision which provided complete corporate immunity for the 3 foreign-owned security companies. Likewise, the Senate voted to shield the 3 security companies from corporate responsibility on November 19, 2002. These congressional votes effectively prevent any legal investigation or discovery into the security failures on the foreign companies on 9/11. Hellerstein, however, is not the only player overseeing 9/11 litigation processes who has close ties to Israel. In fact, all the key players and the law firms involved are either Zionists or do a great deal of business representing Israel companies and or the State of Israel. Kenneth R. Feinberg, for example, the special master of the federally funded Victims' Compensation Fund, is also a deeply dedicated Zionist. Feinberg single-handedly administered the $7 billion fund that paid out U.S. taxpayer money to some 97% of the families who could have otherwise used the courts to sue and recover tort damages and monetary loss for pain and suffering. The families accepted the Feinberg administration federal funds signed away their right to litigate against the government, their airlines, or the security companies. This federally funded payoff to the families effectively prevented nearly all the relatives from using the courts to obtain justice or truth through the legal process, which could have brought discovery of the facts and events of 9/11. For Kenneth Feinberg Group is listed as one of the top 10 supporters of Jerusalem Institute for Israel Studies. The Jerusalem Institute is an Israeli-based Zionist organization that supports the building of illegal separation wall across Palestine, for example. The Feinberg Group also lists as its client major insurance and reinsurance companies such as Lloyd's of London. These are the companies who stood to lose billions of dollars for 9/11 victims' lawsuits had gone forward. Feinberg was appointed special master by the Attorney General John Ashcroft, a dedicated Christian Zionist and supporter of such groups as Stand for Israel, is today working as a lobbyist for Israeli aircraft industries. Israel's major military aerospace company, which hired the former U.S. Attorney General to help secure U.S. government's approval to sell an Israeli weapons system to South Korean Air Force. The Israeli hired Ashcroft to improve their chances against an American-made system built by Chicago-based Boeing Company. Ashcroft was born in Chicago as the former head of the Department of Justice, where his Israeli-American assistant, Michael Chertoff, directed the FBI non-investigation of the events of 9/11. Ashcroft is now being paid by the State of Israel to work against the interests of an American company and the United States. The Hollywood fantasy of Flight 93. On the morning of 9/11, for example, the Associated Press reported that United 93 made an emergency landing in Cleveland Hopkins International Airport. According to the official version, however, Flight 93 crashed into the reclaimed mine near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, shortly after 10 a.m. The AP story clearly reported that United had identified the plane that landed at Cleveland as Flight 93. Cleveland's mayor, Michael R. White, reportedly said the plane had landed due to suspicion that a bomb had been aboard. The most obvious problem with the official version that Flight 93 crashed at the site near Shanksville is that the photographs and eyewitnesses' accounts describe a crater too small for such a large plane to have crashed. A crater at the reclaimed mine was less than 24 feet across and about 6 feet deep. Yet the official version claims that into this crater a Boeing 757 supposedly buried itself, the passengers, the cargo, and thousands of gallons of jet fuel. Nina Lensbauer, who had prepared lunch for the workers at the scrapyard overlooking the crash site, said she was the first person to reach the crater. Lensbauer said that the crater was 5 to 6 feet deep and smaller than a 24-foot trailer in her front yard. She described the sound as an explosion, like an atomic bomb, not a crash. Somerset County Coroner Wallace Miller, who was one of the first people to arrive at the crash site, said it looked as if someone took a scrap truck, dug a 10-foot ditch, and dumped trash into it. Miller said there was nothing visible of human remains and that it was as if the plane had stopped and let the passengers off before it crashed. He said that the most eerie thing about the site was that he hadn't seen a single drop of blood. Miller said he was stunned at how small the crater was. I stopped being coroner after 20 minutes, Miller said, because there was no bodies there. Let's see, okay. One of the noteworthy news events at Cleveland Airport is that 78 passengers were taken to the NASA Glenn Research Center. Let me see this chapter. Yeah, okay, we're still in the same chapter. One of the noteworthy news events at Cleveland Airport is that 78 passengers were taken to the NASA Glenn Research Center, which had been evacuated, where they were interviewed by FBI agents. Why were the passengers taken to the NASA facility, and why were FBI agents waiting for them there? The NASA administrator at the time was Daniel Saul Golden, the longest-serving administrator of NASA history, who was also a Zionist with close ties to Israel. Golden's career began at the same NASA facility at Cleveland Airport. 3 weeks before 9/11, the Israeli cabinet discussed Golden's recent visit to Israel, during which he met with senior Israeli officials to discuss the special relationship and cooperation between Israel and the United States in the field of space research. During his visit, Golden promised NASA cooperation in fields that will promote Israeli industries and educational projects. Golden resigned from NASA 2 months after 9/11. I called NASA Glenn Research Center to ask about the passengers that were taken to the facility on 9/11. No one was brought here, said a puzzled NASA spokesperson who was among those evacuated on 9/11. Mary Etheridge, journalist with the Akron Beacon Journal, however, stood by the paper's report that the passengers had been interviewed by FBI in the evacuated NASA facility. The facts indicate that a leading Zionist controlled the corrupt mayor of Cleveland, who in turn controlled the airport where suspicious secretive events occurred in 9/11 and the evacuated NASA facility. Furthermore, NASA was under the control of a Zionist, as was FBI, which was under the control of Assistant Attorney General Michael Chertoff. Chertoff, as I discovered, is an Israeli national whose mother, Livia Eisen, was one of the first agents in Israel's military intelligence agency Mossad. Okay, it's all very interesting. Wow, okay, let's see. All right, I think Israeli code on U.S. government computers. The NSA, Central Security Service, defines itself as America's cryptologic organization, which coordinates, directs, and performs highly specialized activities, protect U.S. government information systems, and produce foreign signals intelligence information. The fact that the Federal Intelligence Agency responsible for protecting the most critical computer systems and communications networks used by all branches of the U.S. government and military is using Israeli-made encryption software should come as no surprise. The RSA press release is just the icing on the cake. The keys to most critical computer networks in the United States have long been held in Israeli hands. I inquired with NSA about its use of Israeli-made security software for classified communication projects and asked why such outsourcing was not seen as a national security threat. Why is America's cryptologic organization using Israeli encryption codes? NSA spokesman Ken White said that the agency is researching the matter and would respond in the coming week. Previously, I reported that scores of security software companies spawned and funded by Mossad, the Israeli military agency, have proliferated in the United States. The security software products of many of these usually short-lived Israeli-run companies have been integrated into the U.S. computer products, which are provided to the U.S. government by leading suppliers such as Unisys. Unisys integrated Israeli security software provided by the Israeli-based Checkpoint Software Technologies and Eurekify into its own software, so that Israeli software written by Mossad-linked companies now secures the most sensitive computers in the U.S. government and commercial sector. The Mossad-spawned computer security firms typically have an office in the United States, while the research and development is done in Israel. The Mossad startup firms usually have short life before they are acquired for exaggerated sums of money by a larger company, enriching their Israeli owners in the process, and integrating the Israeli directors and the Mossad produced software into the parent company. RSA, for example, an older security software company, acquired an Israeli-run security software company named Cyota, which at the end of 2005 for $145 million. In January 2005, Cyota, the leading provider for online security and anti-fraud solutions for financial institutions, had announced that security expert Amit Yaron had joined the company's board of directors. Prior to becoming a director at Cyota, Yaron, a 34-year-old Israeli, had already been the national cyber czar, having served as director of the Department of Homeland Security's National Cybersecurity Division. Yaron had been appointed cyber czar at age 32 by President George W. Bush, September 2003. Before joining DHS, Yaron had been vice president for worldwide managed security services at Symantec. Prior to that, he had been the founder, president, CEO of Riptech Incorporated, an information security management and monitoring firm, which Symantec acquired in 2002 for $145 million. Yaron and his brother Naftali Yalad Yaron are graduates of the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. Yalad graduated in 91 and Amit 93, along with the brother Dov, and the Yaron brothers are key players in the security software market. Amit has also held critical positions in U.S. government overseeing computer security for the very systems that apparently failed on 9/11. Before founding Riptech in 1998, Amit Yoran directed the Vulnerability Assessment Program within the Computer Emergency Response Team at the U.S. Department of Defense. Yoran previously served as an officer of the United States Air Force, as the Director of Vulnerability Programs for the Department of Defense's Computer Emergency Response Team, and in support of Assistant Secretary of Defense Office. In June 2005, Yoran joined the Board of Directors of Guardium Incorporated, another Mossad-spawned provider of data security solutions based in Walton, Massachusetts. Guardium is linked with P-Tech, an apparent Mossad cutout computer security company linked with the 9/11 attacks. Okay. Who's behind the attacks on Professor Jones? Okay, Israeli fugitive forewarned. Okay, the Ondigo messages. We read about those. I guess we'll reread those. Okay, but basically the Ondigo instant message said something to the effect that it was something big was going to happen on the morning of 9/11. It was sent to Israeli citizens living in the area who were on that subscription. Who's behind the attacks on Professor Jones? September 2006. Like a modern-day Galileo or Socrates, a highly respected physicist who has challenged with logic and scientific evidence the official explanation for the collapse of the World Trade Center, has been banned from teaching classes at his university. On September 7th, third day of the new fall semester at Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah, Stephen E. Jones, professor of physics and 9/11 researcher, was suddenly banned by university authorities from teaching the physics classes he had taught for the past 21 years. Jones was unexpectedly suspended with pay after participating in a radio show in which he had been cunningly lured to comment on a subject outside his field and ask about the motivation of the neoconservatives blamed for the terror attacks September 11, 2001. Jones, a soft-spoken physicist who specializes in metal-catalyzed fusion, archochemistry, and I don't even know this word, metry. I don't even know what that is. Solar energy, joined a 9/11 research effort after being intrigued by the unexplained collapse of the 47-story World Trade Center 7, 5:25 p.m. on the afternoon of 9/11. Jones' scientific interest was sparked after having read reports that molten iron had been found in the rubble of all three collapsed World Trade 7 towers and World Trade 7-7. Okay, an analysis of molten metal. The question of what caused the 47 load-bearing central columns of the Twin Towers to fall has been a fundamental question about the unexplained collapse of World Trade Center towers. The fire-induced collapse scenario does not explain why these crucial internal box columns would have failed. Last summer, after obtaining pieces of the hardened molten fragments from the World Trade Center, Jones and other scientists at BYU conducted extensive laboratory tests and found that the molten metal was primarily composed of iron with slight traces of structural steel. From the physical and photographic evidence, Jones concluded that thermite or a similar aluminothermic process was used to slice the central core columns and bring down the Twin Towers. Jones, along with two other physicists and geologists at BYU, conducted energy department spectroscopy, X-ray fluorescence, and electron microprobe analysis on the samples. The previously molten metal samples were predominantly iron with very little chromium, Jones said, along with the predominantly iron with very little chromium, along with uncommon chemical elements in abundance such as fluorine and manganese. Aluminum and sulfur were also present, which he said would be expected from thermate reactions. Thermate is a thermite granulated or powdered aluminum and ferrous oxide with 2% sulfur added to the mixture to increase the steel cutting effectiveness of the reaction. The results, Jones says in the presentation recently gave at Ohio State University, coupled with visual evidence at the scene, such as the flowing yellow hot liquid metal still red after falling 500 feet, provide compelling evidence that thermate reaction compounds, alumothermetics, were used, meaning thermite was deliberately placed in both towers and WT7. Radio trap. On September 5th, Doug Fabrizio, executive producer, Radio West on the University of Utah's public radio station, NPR, invited Jones to come on his one-hour program to discuss 9/11 research. Before Jones could even discuss his research, however, Fabrizio was aggressively quizzing him on the neoconservative motivation for the attacks and repeatedly pressed him to comment on a subject far outside his field, to explain who within the government could have been involved in attacks of, if not 19 Arab hijackers with box cutters. Because Jones, a physicist, is not engaged in political background of false flag terrorism attacks, he reluctantly responded to Fabrizio's question by citing the author Webster Tarpley's analysis that individuals such as Paul Wolfowitz and Richard Pearl, who are linked to the international banking cartel, have been named by Tarpley as possible suspects. Jones was careful to say that these were not his ideas but Tarpley's, and that these were possible subjects that Tarpley had named. Jones is generally reluctant to discuss the political implications of his findings, and his comments about Wolfowitz and Pearl on the radio program created quite a buzz on campus, the Desert Morning newspaper reported. After interviewing Jones for a brief 20 minutes, Fabrizio said goodbye to Jones and turned the remainder of the hour over to a discussion of conspiracy theories with two Jewish professors, Robert Goldberg from the University of Utah and Gary Fine from Northwestern. The first caller was a William Tumpowski, chairman of the Jewish Community Relations Council and the board member of the local Israeli funding organization, the United Jewish Federation. Tumpowski charged that Jones was using code language to make anti-Semitic allegations. Goldberg supported this accusation. Starting from this outrageous allegations, Fabrizio continued the hostile discussion with Goldberg and Fine, with frequent allegations that now absent physics professor was nothing more than an anti-Semite indulging in conspiracy fantasies. The most significant evidence brought forth by Jones' research was not even discussed. Within 2 days, the authorities at the PYU apparently caved to organized Jewish pressure and put Jones on paid leave. Students who had already begun their fall physics courses with Jones will be taught by other faculty members for the rest of the semester as university administrators review his statements and research. Repeated calls to BYU spokeswoman Carrie Jenkins about the banning of Jones from the classroom were not returned. Jenkins has not responded to any of my questions left with BYU's communications office. I'm not sure we did it the right way, Fabrizio said after he accepted responsibility for the radio program that sparked the sacking of Jones. Asked why he had pressed Jones to make a statement about who was behind the attacks, Fabrizio said, "I was interested in what motivated the science." This is, however, a less than honest answer because Jones has always stressed in his presentations that it is the unexplained collapse of World Trade Center 7 and the presence of molten iron in the rubble that motivated his investigation. And let me repeat myself. The fact that the 9/11 research is being equivocated with anti-Semitism is like saying pay no attention to the Jewish man behind the curtain. I mean, they're making it obvious that they have something to hide. The American Association of University Professors criticized BYU's decision to place Jones on paid leave for his comments on the radio program. AAUP General Secretary Roger Brown called BYU's decision distressing and said Jones shouldn't be removed from teaching classes for statements made outside the classroom. Academic freedom also protects extramural utterances, that is, statements made by faculty outside the classroom when they speak as citizens. Bowen told the Desert Morning News, "It's very clear there never should be official retribution for faculty who exercise their rights as citizens, with the very careful disclaimer that they are not speaking on behalf of the university." The Foundation for Individual Rights in Education joined in the criticism of BYU's decision against Jones. BYU is literally the example we use of a university that does not promise strong free speech or academic freedom protection, FIRE President Greg Lukianoff said. Yeah, you know, it is pretty amazing these days. The ADL can terrorize people. If you rightly criticize criminal activity, you can end up in trouble. It's like, and this is what happened, by the way, to the author Christopher Bollyn. We'll get into that later, but it's like he calls the police to report criminal activity, such as, Larry Silverstein was involved in facilitating 9/11. So the police go to Silverstein and say, "Is this true, this accusation?" He says, "Well, he's just saying this because I'm Jewish. He's anti-Semitic. You better go arrest him." And so he gets arrested for being anti-Semitic. That's that 9/11 truth. That's where it's at. That's the kind of justice system that they're up against. 9/11 truth. Catastrophic terrorism. There are other agents, many of them highly placed Americans, who clearly and specifically push the agenda, which we now call war on terror, as a response to a catastrophic terror attack long before 9/11. 3 men authored an article in 1998 in Foreign Affairs, the bi-monthly publication of the Council of Foreign Relations, in which they laid out what changes would need to be made within U.S. government in the wake of catastrophic terrorism, which is also the title of the article. The Catastrophic Terrorism article, written by Ashton B. Carter, John M. Deutsch, and Philip D. Zilikow, appeared in the last issue of Foreign Affairs in 1998. It begins with the strange subtitle, "Imagining the Transforming Event," as if what was actually desired by the authors was a transformation of the U.S. government and the way Americans live. The authors of the article, like Netanyahu, do not even mention the political causes of terrorism. Understanding the causes of terrorism in an effort to prevent it does not even occur to them. No, these 3 architects are busy imagining the transforming event and how to respond to it. This article is clearly architectural level document. It is meant to explain what should be done in the event of a catastrophic terror attack. Its authors are imagining. For this reason, the authors desire to be investigated to see what kind of relationship they might have to those who carried out the false flag terrorism attacks in 9/11. I'm sorry, let me reread that. For this reason, the authors deserve to be investigated to see what kind of relationship they might have to those who carried out the false flag 9/11. Okay, so basically, Bollyn is saying the fact that they were seeking these means and results, should make them suspicious, suspects. Like Pearl Harbor, catastrophic terrorism has moved from far-fetched horror to contingency that could happen next month, the essay warns. Although the United States still takes conventional terrorism seriously, it is not yet prepared for the new threat of catastrophic terrorism. The bombings in East Africa killed hundreds. A successful attack with weapons of mass destruction could certainly take thousands, tens of thousands of lives. If the device that exploded in 1993 under the World Trade Center had been nuclear or had effectively dispersed a deadly pathogen, the resulting horror and chaos would have exceeded our ability to describe it. Such an act of catastrophic terrorism would be a watershed event in American history that could involve loss of life and property, unprecedented in peacetime, and undermine America's fundamental sense of security. As did the Soviet atomic bomb test in 1949, like Pearl Harbor, this event would divide our past and future into the before and after. The United States might respond with draconian measures, scaling back civil liberties, allowing wider surveillance of citizens, detention of suspects, and use of deadly force. More violence could follow, either further terrorist attacks or U.S. counterattacks. Belatedly, Americans would judge their leaders negligent for not addressing terrorism more urgently. With amazing prescience, the authors will write about all 8 things they said might happen as a result of an attack of catastrophic terrorism like Pearl Harbor. The authors go on to recommend specifically what the U.S. government should do in the wake of such an event of catastrophic terrorism, which they concluded was an imminent threat. The U.S. government should have the authority to monitor any group and its potential state sponsors that might have motive and the means to use weapons of mass destruction. The United States needs a new institute to gather intelligence on catastrophic terrorism, a National Terrorism Intelligence Center that would collect and analyze information so that it could warn suspected catastrophic terror attacks ahead of time. Washington must now work on other countries to extend their prohibitions against development and possession of weapons of mass destruction. International norms should adapt so that states are obliged to reassure other states that are worried and to take responsible measures to prove that they are not secretly developing weapons of mass destruction. Failure to supply such proof or to prosecute the criminals living within their borders should entitle worried nations to take all necessary actions for their self-defense. The United States should aspire as a long-term objective to identify every person and all afraid entering the country. The United States should support a system to ensure that everyone's country's passports are computer readable, with everyone's country's passport control station linked to a database. The same issue of foreign affairs, in which the prescient essay on catastrophic terrorism appeared, there was an essay about Osama bin Laden's license to kill by Bernard Lewis, the British Zionist mastermind of academia. After reading the Lewis article, in which he says Osama bin Laden calls on Muslims to kill Americans and plunder their possessions wherever they find him and wherever he can, there can be no doubt who should be the prime suspect behind any event of catastrophic terrorism. So who are the authors of this prescient article about how the U.S. should respond to the act of catastrophic terrorism? Ashton B. Carter. Carter is a Ford Foundation professor of science and international affairs at Harvard University, John F. Kennedy School of Government, and a former Assistant Secretary of Defense. In 1998, essay he co-wrote with Deutsch and Zilikow was published in a book he wrote with William Perry entitled Preventive Defense, an American Security Strategy for the 21st Century. Carter is also a member of the Board of Trustees of MITRE, where he was a trustee from 1988-93. The MITRE Corp is a major defense contracting organization based in Bedford, Massachusetts, which is headed by former Director of Central Intelligence, James Rodney Schlesinger. MITRE's crucial communications command and control system clearly failed in 9/11, something that deserves investigation. Let me interject here too that after they have a false flag event, and, some important guy comes on and they got a picture of him in the paper, like Department of the DSA or something, and he comes out and says, these terrorism, terrorist events are only going to, become more prominent and, more frequent, and blah, blah, blah. And, you think to yourself, hey, if I was in charge, if I was being paid by a company to, make sure nothing goes wrong, and something goes wrong, and I tell my boss, well, these are going to continue to go wrong unless you pay me more. How well would that go over? Why do the American people take that? Why do we listen to these authorities who if you're going to stand in front of the American people and say, well, terrorism is going to increase and blah blah blah, and you're supposed to be in charge of controlling it, then and preventing it, then you're either incompetent or you're complicit. And I think they're complicit. So that's another, when they come on there and say something like that, that's another reason to conclude that they're involved in terrorism. Okay, in other words, the people that are ahead of the agencies that are supposed to prevent it are the ones actually doing it. I had got a communication once from our representative, and he's saying, he was all concerned, there's supposed to be an increase in Alzheimer's. But why? And so we gotta spend this money on Alzheimer's research. So I wrote him back and said, why is there supposed to be an increase in Alzheimer's? What's causing it? Is it all the aluminum they're spraying in the sky? I mean, why see? So that the government's involved in trying to increase Alzheimer's disease. It's the same thing with the opioid thing. The government provides the opium. That's why we went over to Afghanistan to get the opium, so that we could have an opioid crisis. And then we can use taxpayer money to fund a recovery center system with tax dollars. And so the government wants to look like they care about these victims so much, the opioid crisis, that they're going to spend all this money for these centers. In the meantime, the government is orchestrating the entire opioid crisis. Okay, so anyways, let's go back to reading here. We're on page 169. Solving 9/11, Christopher Bollyn. From 2001 to 2002, Carter served on the National Academy of Sciences Committee on Science and Technology for Countering Terrorism, and advised on the creation of the Department of Homeland Security. Carter is also senior partner in a company called Global Technology Partners, of which William Perry is chairman. John Mark Deutsch is former director of Central Intelligence and co-author of the article, is also a senior partner at GTP. What is GTP? Global Technology Partners, LLC, is an exclusive affiliate of Rothschild's North America, formed to make acquisitions of and investments in technology, defense, and aerospace-related companies. According to a biographical sketch of one of the corporation's senior partners, Paul Kaminsky, elsewhere it is described as an aerospace and defense investment bank and boutique affiliated with the Rothschilds Group, or a professional services firm associated with Rothschilds Group of investment banks. Okay. So Ashton B. Carter, John M. Deutsch, William Perry, and other fellows at GTP work for the Rothschild family, the Jewish financiers of governments and founders of the State of Israel. John Mark Deutsch. This explains how Deutsch, who was born in Belgium, and his father, who was born in Russia, and who only came to the United States in 1940, were so quickly advanced within the Washington power structure. Deutsch's father, Michael J. Deutsch, was born in Smolensk, Russia, in 1907. The Deutsch family came to the United States in 1940, where Michael quickly became deputy director at the War Production Board, in charge of making synthetic rubber. A December 27, 1946 article, Chicago Tribune, entitled "List Alien Rulers in the U.S." listed some of the foreigners found in a secret 71-page report had received high government wartime posts. Michael Deutsch was one of them. Correspondence passing between the Secretary of the Interior and the Office of War Mobilization indicate that Deutsch was pushed up the ladder of promotion with unusual vigor by someone. The secret report from the House Committee on Un-American Activities said Michael Deutsch was a Russian Jew whose family supposedly fled the Bolshevik Revolution for Belgium. In Belgium, where he studied chemical engineering, he married Rachel Fisher, the daughter of Jean Jonan Fisher, a diamond merchant, and of Antwerp, who ran the Zionist Federation of Belgium. This connection could explain why Deutsch was promoted so quickly when he came to Washington. John Deutsch's maternal grandfather, Johann Fischer, was a prominent Zionist and friend of Israel's first president, Chaim Weizmann. Fischer was a very high-level Zionist within the international military political network centered in London. Johann had extensive business arrangements in Palestine, Israel, and even started a town which is named after him, Kafir Yonah. Okay. John Deutsch has served as director of Citigroup, Citibank since 1987. He is also professor at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Philip D. Zelikow. Philip D. Zelikow is all over 9/11, its aftermath, and the subsequent wars in the Middle East. 3 years after warning of catastrophic terrorism, Zelikow became the executive director of 9/11 Commission, the appointed government whitewash which utterly failed to address the key questions and evidence of the terror attacks of 9/11. Zelikow from Houston served on President George W. Bush's transition team in 2001 after Bush took office. Zelikow was named to the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board and served on National Commission on Federal Election Reform, which produced the extremely flawed Help America Vote Act 2002. Zelikow had been a career Foreign Service officer overseas and served on National Security Council. More recently, Zelikow was a member of the Iraq Study Group, which pretended to study what went wrong with the disastrous, illegal, and ill-advised war that Jewish Zionist neocons, the controlled media, and the Bush administration all pushed so hard for. Zelikow, the grandson of Russian Jewish immigrant Taylor, who was very close to Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, he could be seen as having been her legal and Zionist handler. Zelikow joined the National Security Council in George Bush's administration at the same time Condoleezza Rice. Only recently, Zelikow resigned as counselor of the U.S. Department of State, where he served as senior president policy advisor to the Secretary of State. Okay. So, conflict of interest, and this is having to do with the the victim plaintiffs of 9/11. Sheila Birnbaum, the special mediator, is a partner in the law firm Skidden Arps, a leading corporate law firm with close business ties to Israel. The firm calls itself one of the leading U.S. legal advisors to Israel companies doing business and raising capital outside of Israel. Many of the attorneys are thoroughly familiar with the legal structure, business environment, and political system of Israel, and several have been admitted to bars in both Israel and New York and are fluent in Hebrew and English, the firm website says. Israeli individuals and companies, however, are suspects and defendants in the crimes of 9/11. At least 200 Israeli suspects were arrested in connection with 9/11. An Israeli airport security company, Huntley U.S., is at the very center of the story. Huntley, the passenger screening company that checked the passengers at the airports of Boston and Newark in 9/11, is wholly owned subsidiary ICTS, an Israeli company headed by Menachem Atzmon, a political ally of Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, and a man convicted of illegally raising funds for the Likud party, where he was the party's co-treasurer with Olmert in the 1980s. Scores of Israeli movers and art students were arrested in New York and Florida as suspects in connection with the events of 9/11. The evidence clearly indicates that the terror attacks were Israeli false flag operations and were carried out to be blamed on Muslims and Arabs in order to instigate Zionist planned war on terror against enemies of Israel. The Israeli terrorist suspects were quietly released, going to trial while innocent Arabs were wrongly blamed. The Israeli terror suspects were quietly released without going to trial, while innocent Arabs were wrongly blamed. This was done while the criminal division of the Department of Justice was headed by the Israeli-American Michael Chertoff. Okay, so You see something, you say something. You call up, and Michael Chertoff answers the phone. All right. Judge forces families to settle out of court. With the 6th anniversary of 9/11 only 2 days away, the New York Post has published an article highlighting a callous comment made by Manhattan federal judge Alvin K. Hellerstein, who said that the families of 9/11 victims should settle for cash and get on with their lives. The New York Post article of September 7th, titled "Families Fume at Callous Judge" by Susan Edelman, reported, some of the 41 families who refused 9/11 compensation to press lawsuits against airlines are furious at remarks of the presiding judge, who hopes they will give up their day in court if the price is right. Manhattan federal judge Alvin Hellerstein says the diehard 9/11 families should settle for cash and move on. For 9/11 plaintiffs and millions of others around the world who are hoping for justice and discovery about who was really responsible for the terror attacks that took 3,000 lives, they may now realize that Judge Hellerstein is not at all inclined to go down that path. To understand where Judge Alvin K. Hellerstein's loyalties lie is the key to understanding why he is so adamantly opposed to open trials and a public airing of the 9/11 evidence. For background reading, I recommend my earlier article about Hellerstein and his Zionist roots, the judicial hijacking of 9/11 victims' lawsuits. Judge Hellerstein has deep and long-standing Zionist connections and close family ties to the State of Israel. Milford Hellerstein, his wife, for example, is a former senior vice president and current treasurer of New York-based Zionist organization called AMIT. AMIT promotes Jewish immigration to Israel and stands for Americans for Israel and Torah. AMIT's motto is building Israel one child at a time. Judge Hellerstein is also a longtime member of Jewish Center of New York, a former president of the Board of Jewish Education of Greater New York. One of the defendants of 9/11's victims' tort litigation is Israeli-owned Mossad-run airport security and passenger screening company Huntley USA Corp. Huntley USA is a wholly owned subsidiary of an Israeli company called International Consultants on Targeted Securities, ICTS, NV, a Netherlands-based aviation transportation security firm headed by former Israeli military commanding officers and veterans of the government intelligence and security agency, Mossad, Shin Bet, etc. While the 9/11 terror case, in which an Israeli security company is a key defendant and individuals from Israeli military intelligence are suspected of being involved, was Hellerstein chosen to preside over all 9/11 victim lawsuits. Who chose him? Okay. On page 186. We're about halfway through. Federal Register notice on regulations described SSI as including information about security programs, vulnerability assessments. This is called sensitive security information, Homeland Security, and exclusive evidence. Okay. Federal Register notice on the regulations describing SSI as including information about security programs, vulnerability assessments, technical specifications of certain screening equipment and other objects used to test screening equipment, and other information. Clearly, the SSI pertains to the passenger screening procedure that was employed by the 3 foreign-owned airline security firms involved in 9/11. The failure of these firms to stop the hijackers is seen by the relatives as a key reason for the catastrophe. Chertoff in charge. When the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, was established in November 2002, the TSA became a branch of the new Security Department. Michael Chertoff, the U.S. Assistant Attorney General with Israeli roots, became DHS Secretary on February 15, 2005, when he's confirmed by the U.S. Senate and sworn in. When 9/11 occurred, Assistant Attorney General Chertoff was responsible for the Criminal Division of the Department of Justice. This made him the top official for law enforcement and investigation process surrounding the terror attacks. When Chertoff was made Secretary of DHS, he became the responsible official for controlling what evidence would be released to the court involved in 9/11 litigation. This makes Chertoff the person who has been continuously responsible for controlling the investigation, access to the evidence of 9/11. Okay. Smoke and dust. Toxic smoke from rubble. First, it needs to be clarified that there were primarily two types of toxic cloud caused by the destruction of World Trade Center. Raymond writes about the visible dust seen in the pyroclastic clouds that rolled down the streets of Lower Manhattan after the explosive demolition of the Twin Towers, Larry Silverstein's World Trade Center 7. But he is missing the smoke that rose from the pile until Christmas 2001. It needs to be remembered that extremely hot spots burned beneath the pile for more than 3 months until they exhausted themselves at Christmas 2001. These hot spots were evidently hotter than the boiling point of iron, 2,861 degrees Celsius or 5,182 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay. Which reminds me, this is why that Professor Judy Woods is controlled opposition and disinformation agent, because she insists that 9/11 was a cold event. So, she's out there to spread disinformation. I don't trust her at all. So, anyways, although I mean, half the stuff she says is true, but she tries to steer it into some kind of incoherent mess. So molten iron in the molten state was found in the basement of all three towers weeks after they were demolished. These hotspots, which with the evidence suggests were caused by ongoing aluminothermic reaction fueled by massive amounts of thermite, continuously produced a high amount of extremely small particles in the nano-sized range that rose from the pile in plumes of bluish smoke. The smoke, laden with toxic nanoparticles, wafted over New York City for many weeks and went in all directions. Millions of people may have been exposed to these toxic plumes, which can carry toxic particles great distances. I visited the University of California, Davies in spring of 2006 to interview Thomas A. Cahill, an expert on airborne particles. Cahill had conducted a study of the particles in the thin bluish smoke that rose from the rubble for nearly 4 months after 9/11. Cahill's air sampling was done a few blocks north of the destroyed World Trade Center and began on October 2nd, 2001 and continued until December, when the last fires were finally extinguished. I asked Cahill why it had taken so long to begin monitoring the air contamination caused by the destruction of World Trade Center. He said that he had assumed that there were scores of agencies and scientists monitoring the air quality in New York City after 9/11. I assumed it was happening. I could not believe it was not, Cahill said. Davies drum, was all by itself. The EPA did nothing. For the people who worked or lived near the pile of the destroyed World Trade Center, these plumes were extremely dangerous. So they used this thing called the Davis drum. Okay, conspirators' unbreakable bond, Zionist judges. In what might otherwise be seen as coincidence, the two presidentially appointed federal judges who have presided over most crucial 9/11 cases are both the Orthodox Zionist Jews who attend the same Manhattan synagogue and support its Talmudic yeshiva. The federal judges, Alvin K. Hellerstein and Michael B. Mukasey, the nominees to be a next U.S. Attorney General, are both members of the Zionist congregation, the Orthodox Keliath Jeshurun Synagogue of Manhattan, and they are active supporters of its yeshiva, the Ramah School. A yeshiva is an Orthodox Jewish school affiliated with the synagogue where Talmudic interpretation of Mosaic law is taught. In an Orthodox yeshiva, the Talmudic interpretation of Torah is based on rabbinical teaching that completely changes the meaning of the Mosaic law. Talmudic interpretation effectively negates the meaning of the Ten Commandments, as the late Israeli scholar Israeli Shahak pointed out in his book on Jewish supremacy, Jewish history, Jewish religion, the weight of 3,000 years. To an Orthodox Jew, Shahak wrote, Talmudic scholars interpret the commandment, thou shalt not kill, to mean that a Jew is prescribed only from killing another Jew. Non-Jews, on the other hand, are fair game and can be killed like animals. The rest of the Mosaic law is interpreted likewise concerning treatment of non-Jews according to Shahak's book. Unbeknownst to most Americans, the key judges who have overseen the most important 9/11 lawsuits and Michael Chertoff, the Assistant Attorney General, who directed the non-investigation 9/11, are all members of this racist and un-American religious sect. They, like other key officials involved in 9/11 conspiracy, were all raised and educated in this tradition. The judges, officials, and advisors involved at every critical point in 9/11 conspiracy and cover-up are all Jewish Zionists dedicated to the State of Israel. This is how Zionist agents have been able to cover up the truth of what really happened on 9/11. The synagogue, the congregation Kehileth Jeshurun, is a Zionist synagogue. According to its mission statement, it defines itself as modern Orthodox synagogue, which is deeply committed to an unbreakable bond with the State of Israel and its citizens. The Orthodox branch of Judaism is a minority sect making up 10% of American Jews. This minority sect, however, wields immense power in the government and the courts of the United States. The Kehileth Jeshurun congregation has a long history of shaping Zionist agenda. In the 1920s, for example, it hosted Orthodox Zionist conferences where plans were discussed to bring all Jews of Russia to the southwestern United States. Our identification with the State of Israel and our fellow Jews extends well beyond the most conventional UJA Federation, Israeli bonds, and tree planting campaigns. The congregation's mission statement says, and indeed it does. The Kehileth Jeshurun congregation acts as an agency of Israel on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, and some of its members occupy positions of power within the government of the United States. The modern Orthodox congregation also has a long history of calling for segregation and separation of Jews from Christians and Christian influences in the community. Like other Orthodox Jews, the congregation is opposed to Reform Judaism, the largest branch of Judaism. Orthodox religious expression is the only form of Judaism that is recognized by the State of Israel. As a religious sect based on race, intermarriage between Jews and Christians is anathema to Orthodox Jews like Chertoff, Hellerstein, and Mukasey. And by the way, see, I agree with a lot. I agree with a lot of that their beliefs in terms of if people want to be segregated based on race or religion or anything, that they have the right to do that. That's more important than being forced to integrate. See, right now we have a global system of forced integration, which is not biblical. I mean, it's not correct according to the Torah, and the fact that it's not correct, according to the Talmud, is just coincidence, because the Talmud is just a man-made invention. However, it doesn't mean it's always wrong. Even if Jewish people want to believe they're superior, I don't have a problem with that. Why? That's not the problem. Is going around killing people is not. It shouldn't be tolerated. By anybody. So, that's there's a difference between believing something and then going out and acting on it. That's why I don't care. If somebody's a racist or something, it doesn't bother me at all. But as long as they're not going to use it to hurt other people. If they want to use it to segregate, that's fine. They have that right. And that's, to me, that's the way. That's the whole purpose of my YouTube channel. Really, is to promote the idea of closed societies, and that's what Jesus came to establish, a closed society. And so there we have common ground. Although to try to control others and use force is of the devil. And so these are really children of Satan, as Jesus called them. And these are the same people that went after Jesus and the apostles. Well, this is what they look like today. They look like this Talmudic, violent, murderous control freaks. Okay, so to understand how a small group of dedicated individuals can control the truth of a huge crime, it is necessary to know how the cover-up works. In a criminal cover-up like that at work with 9/11, there are three main processes that need to be controlled. The investigation, primarily the collection and confiscation of evidence. The interpretation, how the event is explained by the mass media and appointed official commissions. And three, the prosecution and litigation, the handling of lawsuits pertaining to the crime. It can be assumed that people involved in the cover-up are connected to the perpetrators of the crime. In the case of 9/11, the people who controlled each and every one of these three key processes, investigation, interpretation, and prosecution are Zionist Jews who share a dedicated loyalty to the State of Israel. The fact that Zionists have played key roles in the covering up of the truth of 9/11 suggests that the Israeli role in the crimes of 9/11 was much greater than most people realize. That is to say, that the Israeli agents monitoring the Arab suspects, which were actually part of an operation that the Mossad was controlling. Okay. Mayor Giuliani, Senator D'Amato, and Israeli intelligence. This was written in 2007. Senator Alphonse M. D'Amato, former mayor of New York City, Rudolph Giuliani, are on the U.S. National Advisory Board of an organization that is closely tied to Israeli military intelligence, the American-Israeli Friendship League. The president and chairman of the U.S. board of this organization is Kenneth J. Balkin. The AJFL is not only non-sectarian national organization that promotes the relationship between the people of the U.S. and the people of Israel on a grassroots level, Balkin says on AJFL's website. The other members of the U.S. National Advisory Board of the AJFL are Senator Max Baucus, John Brodimus, Kenneth Duberstein, Lawrence Eagleberger, Representative Benjamin A. Gilman, William H. Gary III, Vernon Jordan, Henry Kissinger, George P. Solz, Elie Wiesel. AJFL describes its mission as building friendship based on common values. The American-Israeli Friendship League describes itself as non-sectarian, non-political, non-for-profit organization strengthening the ties between the people of the United States and Israel. The Israeli deputy chairman is a man named Rothschild. Major General Danny Rothschild, a former head of Israeli military intelligence and coordinator of government activities in the occupied territories. Rothschild, who owns and runs an Israeli-based security company called Nectax Security Ltd., was the former head of Israeli military intelligence research branch. Nectax does something called airport risk analysis and implementation projects at 9 major airports in the U.S., according to its website. Americans beware. According to the website, Nectax, the owners and executives of Nectax Group, are described thusly. D. Rothschild, Major General. Mr. Rothschild served most of his military service in the Intelligence Corps. Notable positions were Assistant to the Chief of Staff of the Israeli Defense Forces, Commander S. Lebanon, Deputy Director of Military Intelligence, and Chief Intelligence Research Analysis. G. Zohar, Brigadier General. Mr. Zohar served most of his tenure in the Intelligence Corps, notable position, Head of Anti-Terror Research and Operation. S. Ettinger, Colonel. Mr. Ettinger served in elite combat units and field command positions, later served in the Intelligence Corps. Kenneth Balkin is a partner in the law firm of Skadden Arps, among other positions besides being the chair of ALFL. I keep saying AJFL. AIFL. American-Israeli Friendship League. Okay, AIFL. Since 1996, Balkin was the chairman of the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith, the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, the American Jewish Historical Society, and the president of the American Jewish Historical Society. Fighting for Israel America. As leader of the most powerful Jewish organization in the world, Balkin has fought and presented Israelis' case to American presidents, world leaders, to the media, to the American Jewry, and to Muslims. Lifestyles wrote about Balkin in 2004, his friends with Israeli and American politicians and with Israeli prime ministers who often ask for his advice. Balkin comments in his interview with Lifestyles indicates that he does not believe that Jews should assimilate into American population. Balkin says that he's signed on to pursue his Jewish identity because he believes in it. He is proud of it, and because he is forced to, if there were no anti-Semitism and no attacks against us in Israel, if we were not singled out, maybe I'd be an assimilationist. He says, it's funny how they always use this. We're being singled out. Okay, so you're controlling everything. You're in charge of everything. You're conducting terrorist attacks. And when people don't like it, you're being singled out, okay? But forces have made me conscious of my responsibilities. We are an honorable people with honorable traditions. We have a right to seek our betterment. Anyone who gets in my way is depriving me of something to which I am entitled. If I'm a laborer in a vineyard of Jewish liberation, it is because the enemy has forced me to do that. But, you think about what I'm saying. What if a group of whites decide that it's in their best interest to say, start white nationalism and secede from the nation or something? Well, they're just doing the same thing that he's doing. Why is he allowed to do it and they're not? See me? If they do it, they get called all kinds of names. If he does it, it's honorable. Belkin is a partner in the same law firm with the special mediator of 9/11 litigation. There are currently fewer than 24 cases left to be settled. If the cases are all settled in out-of-court settlements, there will be no cases to try. This would mean that the 9/11 catastrophe would never be examined in an open and public trial on behalf of any of the victims and their relatives. Judge Alvin K. Hellerstein, who oversees all the 9/11 litigation, has long been pressing the lawyers to settle the cases. The June 8, 2006 conference revealed how Hellerstein put pressure on lawyers to settle their cases out of court. I wrote about the judge's pressure to settle in July 2006. In many of the wrongful death cases, such as that of Mrs. Mariani, the first 9/11 lawsuit, the plaintiffs rejected the compensation fund provided by the U.S. government and hoped that they would obtain truth and justice through the courts. Why aren't you settling your cases? Hellerstein asked Donald Miglori, attorney for plaintiffs with the law firm Motley Rice. You're not working hard enough, Hellerstein said. Mrs. Birnbaum, special mediator, tells me she's getting no response from you. Sheila Birnbaum is the court-appointed special mediator who is a lawyer from the law firm of Skadden Arps, which is a firm with very close ties to the State of Israel and insurance companies. One of the partners of Skadden Arps is Kenneth Belkin, a former national chairman of the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith, a key Zionist organization. Belkin is also former director of some of the key insurance companies involved in 9/11 litigation. Okay, let's see. 2013, we're about 2 hours. I guess I'll wrap it up here. I guess we probably got 2 more 2-hour videos to make. But, I'm convinced that his information is correct. The only thing, I differ a bit with a lot of 9/11 truthers, and I respect these guys a great deal, like James Fetzer. James Fetzer is excellent at this, and he's also been accused of being anti-Semitic for investigating 9/11. Well, although Fetzer doesn't like the thermite evidence, I don't know why. I think it's there. I think what Fetzer's missing. I mean, you may have used nukes, but I think what he's missing is the fact that there's advanced thermatic, chemistry that's beyond anything that he knows about. That's it. And so, they're not going to use known explosives if they have something that's going to be much more difficult recognize. So so my thing is this, Fetzer, Perloff, James Perloff, Christopher Bollyn. Okay, they're making this case that there's a Zionist dynamic to this, and that therefore Zionism is, well, they don't believe in Zionism in the first place, and I do, and so see that muddies up the water. Is almost saying, like, okay, well, let's say you're a Christian Zionist, you believe in Zionism. Okay, therefore, you're afraid to point the finger at the Zionists who did 9/11. I'm not. That's exactly what I'm doing. Just okay. Here's the thing. The way I see it. God is in charge, and He made these promises about the land, and the Jews are going to go back into the land and all this, and they're to have the borders that were described in Leviticus, and I'm okay with that. I'm all for that. But I'm also for reciprocating, and that any other people group that wants an ethno state or a religious state or anything like that should be entitled. Well, the problem is that these Israelis they're not returning the favor. They're not saying, okay, you cooperate with us for an ethno state or religious state, and we'll cooperate with you guys. No, what they're doing instead is they're preventing everybody else from the benefits that they claim that they have a right to. And that's a problem. It shouldn't be that way. That's so I later on in this book you'll see one of these guys, Netanyahu and Olmert, are campaigning for all Jews to go back to Israel, and this is why I think that there are obvious clues left to the Israelis did 9/11, because they don't care if that becomes a force to promote that idea of Jews become unfavorable, like what happened with Dinah and her brothers, the 12 tribes, when she went out to this foreign land and and had sexual relations with one of the guys there, and the brothers didn't like that, and they were going to attack this foreign land and kill him. But before they could, the prince who had sexual relations with Dinah came and said, hey, I really love this girl, I want to marry her, and blah, 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 and said, oh, okay, so here's what you do. You guys all get circumcised, you become like us, and then you can marry her. And when they had been circumcised and they were recovering, they attacked them all and killed them. And so Jacob, is the father of the tribes, was like, all right, you guys are making my name odious. We're making you're making us, our name, odious to the people. You're making us persona non grata. And I think that's sort of one of the elements here, is that these guys who are motivated to get all Jews back to Israel don't care what kind of persecution takes place in order to accomplish that. And that's why they didn't care if the clues to 9/11 led back to Israel. And so, that's an interesting dynamic to them. But I was in a discussion with my best friend about this, and he's saying, is this, why if God's bringing, Jews back to Israel, why does it have to be done in such conniving and sinister, formula? Where has this been precedented in the scriptures. I said, well, look at this with Esau and Jacob and this whole thing about the birthright, and how Jacob and who's his mom, was that Rachel, and they do all this conniving and stuff to fool Israel into giving the birthright to Jacob and not to Esau. And so that promise, the birthright, was already promised. They didn't have to go through all that conniving. So could Israel be reestablished to its Levitical boundaries without violence and without all this stuff happening? And probably not. I mean, that's why God allows violence to happen, because otherwise things wouldn't, they would have to, I guess, violate people's free will to get them there. And so, God knows human psychology, and if it's not this bad, then they won't budge. So things got to get pretty bad before they budge, kind of thing. And so that's how I'm sizing this all up. This is just. See, I would hope that the ADL and people like this who want to persecute people who are seeking truth would consider the Bible itself to be anti-Semitic. You see me? Because that's where I'm basing my desire to seek the truth on the Bible itself. So they really need to put the Bible on the top of their hit list if they wanted to. Because it's all in the Old and New Testament. Is you got all the things that the ADL is attacking people on are all based in the Bible, and so they really need to realize that the problem is with the Word of God. It's not with the people that follow it. So that's my closing remarks. I will be back whenever I get a chance. I actually took a day off. First time in a while where I had a day off where I didn't have to do anything else, so I was able to do this. And I will. It looks like we got probably 2-hour sessions to finish the book, but I think he's making a pretty compelling case. And what people do with that, my suggestion is, to know the truth, but make sure everything going forward is done non-violently. There shouldn't be violence involved in this. I mean, unless you're self-defending. But as far as all my ideas that I'm promoting on YouTube in terms of closed society and so forth are to be done as a result of rhetorical victories, and so that the move towards the goals are non-violent and just happen to occur because of the demographics of the people convinced, the arguments.